Hi, Ben here and welcome back to another Work in Progress Wednesday. Exciting day for me because I'm finally getting the workshop back to rights, and we've spent a lot of time sorting out this room, which is probably the room that I spend the most time in. This is the grinding room, which we try and keep the door shut to stop the dust sort of migrating through the rest of the workshop, but I've spent a long time in here and getting it just perfect. Should have done that years ago really, so wanted to give you a little tour of the grinding room, so come on in and see what we've been up to. So first of all, we've got this piece of equipment which is actually on wheels so I can move it around. This is my metal dust extractor, and as you can see I haven't got any pipes coming out of this yet, so I've still got to get a bit more metal duct in so that I can get that set up on the grinders. But yeah, that's my metal dust extractor. Now I'm still waiting for a few extra metal cupboards, so there's going to be cupboards on this wall and a few of the other walls where I can find space just to put a few of those little odd bits and pieces, tooling, tool rests and things like that. But yeah, they haven't arrived as yet, so that's still got to be done. So extraction and cupboards to do. But what I've actually done, it's kind of been a bit brutal because normally I have a whole long workbench along here and I normally have an extra grinder. But what I've decided to do was lose a bench and remove a grinder, because these grinders that I primarily use for all the blade manufacture, these are my tag grinders made by Chris Wilmot out in the States. These are so good, they've big horsepower motor and they're quite easy to interchange all these different tool arms. So they've got very adjustable tool rests that you can set to different angles and things like that. They remove really easily. And you've got all these different tooling. So the fact that they're so easy to change, I thought, well, what we'll do is we'll lose a grinder, and what it's allowed me to do is tweak the setup a bit, which I'm really happy to start using now. So I've got one tag grinder there. I've also got another tag grinder a little bit further along the bench, and these are on a hinge system, so you can actually flip these if you need to. So they will actually flip nice and easily if I need to do profiling. That noise that you heard there's a little bit of adjustment needed, but I've added some sort of guarding at the back of the grinders to stop the sparks flying up the wall, just to give it a bit of additional protection. Obviously I've got plywood walling in here, so the sparks that are coming off when you're grinding a lot of carbon steel are quite hot, so putting those little sort of guards on the back there will really help things. Crazy things that you never get around to doing when you're a knife maker is, I used to have my quench buckets that catch all the real major sparks. I used to have those on stools, and you'd constantly be knocking into them and spilling buckets of water. And because you'd got the bucket on a stool, you'd find that you'd be standing a little bit further away from your grinder and hurting your back. So I've actually spent a bit of time making these articulated sort of hangers so I can hang my buckets. It means I can get closer to my grinder, so long term it's probably going to help my back, but also it means that I can actually clean up a little bit easier as well. You'll probably see the mess of extra tooling and stuff down here. I'm hoping that I'll be able to put a lot of that in my cupboards when they arrive, and then that means that I can keep that a little bit more dust free then. So that's my other tag grinder. I've actually got that set up with the rotary platen at the moment, but like I say, those all sort of change. The other thing that I've improved on is I used to have lots of little lights to see what I'm doing, and what I found, I've just sourced some new bulbs for these lamps, and these are LED bulbs, so they'll last a long time. They use a lot less electric, but these are 6,000 lumens of light, so they're daylight bulbs, so you get a true colour, but because they're so bright I can actually get away with 2 lamps, and I'll be able to swing that between this grinder, that grinder, and the far grinder on the other end as well. So basically 2 lights like this, if you're working to a scribe line, it's just going to make so much difference. The eyes are getting a little bit dimmer now that I'm getting older. I've had to brave the fact that I'm turning 40 this February, so I'm getting a little bit scared, so obviously the eyes are getting a bit dim, so having some extra lighting is really good. Finally, what I've got on the end now is I've kept my latest KMG grinder. This is from Beaumont Metalworks, and this is their TX. Now again, this is a sort of grinder with multiple tool arms. This has got 2 tool arms in it, But the beauty of this is it's on a different kind of setup for the pivoting. So you literally just slacken this handle, pull that handle, and you'll find that it will pivot super duper easy. So this is a little bit easier at the moment, a little bit lighter to pivot. But what you will find is because of the setup, this is just a little bit tall for most applications. I have actually got to adapt and maybe make a slightly lower bench that's going to go here. So this will be a bit more of a comfortable working height. But most of the time I tend to use this in this position anyway. So that's my KMG TX grinder. And because I've lost that extra bench with that extra grinder, it's allowed me to get my blast cabinets all in one line down this far side of the workshop, which has meant that it's kept this area a lot clearer for walking up and down. So I'm really happy about getting that sorted. And I finally treated myself to put in new protective covers on the glass so I can see what I'm doing. And I've also added wheels to these cabinets, so if I need to get in there or change the grit, I can pull them away from the wall and I'm not struggling to lean at funny angles and things like that. Now, most of these blast cabinets don't come with extraction, so what I've done with both of these is they've both got their separate vacuums, and I've used the little pneumatic Henry hoovers, because if you use the special filter bags, they actually filter down to 1 micron, so very, very good for keeping your air nice and clean. And a little top tip, I found online, these are actually sold for sort of elderly people so that they can access plugs easily, these little pressure things. And they're a pressure switch, which ideally goes on the floor for turning lamps and things on. But what I've done is I've added that to my dust extractor setup. So basically when I'm ready to go, I hit that button, it will turn the light on, and normally what I do is I have the hoover already turned on, so basically when I hit that button, we'll actually turn it all on with just one push of the switch. So that's a real handy little setup for when you're blasting, really. So you might think it's a bit decadent to have 2 blast cabinets in here, but I've got one with silicon carbide for cleaning the blades, and then I've got another one at this end, pretty much the same setup but with a different media in it, which has got garnet in there, and I use that for texturing all the handles. So all the Makata handles and G10, if they've got that textured finish, this is what I use. So yeah, I've got that same setup, same little switch, so I'm ready to go, really. I've also got an extra little air line here with a little air gun, so if I need to, I can just clean off any blades and things like that. I've moved one buffer up to this end of the workshop purely to give me a bit more space down there. I don't use this as much as the other buffers, so this one's up this end. This was a second-hand one, an industrial one, so this is actually 415 volt, so it needed a 3-phase supply, so I've only got 3-phase in certain parts of the workshop. So they've got a buffer up this end. Then this is the sort of blade finishing department, so I've now moved my tumbler down onto a lower filing cabinet that I've got a few bits and pieces in. But being at a bit more of a comfortable height means I'm not going to be stretching over and trying to struggle to find whatever I've got in the tumbler. So this is pretty noisy, I won't turn that on, but I've got my media in there that I use for putting my stonewash finish on there. I've got some of the chemicals that I use for putting on that acid stonewash finish, and some of the neutralisers that I use, so like bicarb of soda, or effectively Windex or window cleaner that's got ammonia in it, so that will neutralise any acids that I use. I've got this pretty nasty pot of ferric chloride that I use for blackening certain steels or for doing the etching on Damascus. And what I've got in there, which seems a bit crazy, but I've actually got a little bubble pump in there. So this is for like an aquarium, so you'll see that agitates the ferric chloride and it helps to give a more even finish. Well, that's what I find anyway. So I've got a little bubble pump in there, so don't put your goldfish in there, but perfect for doing your stonewash finish. Got a sink as well. I didn't have a sink until very recently. My friend Big John helped us get some water in here and some sinks and some hand heaters. Fantastic to be able to actually get a water supply in your workshop rather than going outside to get either rainwater or the hose. Being able to wash your hands or neutralise blades, fantastic. So basically, we're onto this bench. Now this bench used to be chaos because it used to have everything from my tumbler to chemicals to my granite surface plate for scribing blades, and I've moved that all to another department that maybe we'll show you next time. So that's going to give me places to lay out projects, lay out blades, plenty of space to work on. So it feels sort of almost liberating to find a whole new bench to be able to work on rather than working on a tiny little 3-inch square. So yeah, that's really great. I've got a few other bits here. These are my handy sort of top tips. I like to be able to move whatever belts that I'm using for a particular project to the grinder that I'm working on. So I can pretty much unclip one of these spring clamps like market traders use for holding their tarps down with. These are fantastic because you can keep your belts all in one place and move them to whatever grinder you're working on. So those are my sort of belt liner. I've got this sort of contraption at this end of the bench, which is normally rammed full of tooling. I've emptied this out a little bit and made this new storage area for some of my tooling up there for the things that I don't use all the time. But for some of the tooling that I'm going to be using frequently, I've basically freed up this space. This is what they call a tree, a tooling tree. And Chris made these to go with the tag grinder, so it spins, which is handy, and you can basically slide whatever tooling you're not using into these sort of slots, and it keeps them sort of all in one place and sort of easy access. So that's really cool. If you haven't got one of these and you're a knife maker, these are these little digital bevel boxes for setting tool fences and things to a particular angle. These just turn on and will read a digital. They're basically a digital protractor really, so you can set the angle really easily. They're magnetic on the base, so you can put them on and measure angles and things like that. If you haven't got one of those and you're a knife maker, that's what you need to get this year. One of those, probably about 25-30 quid, just fantastic, can't live without that. And then we're moving down the line. I've got one of my little radius masters here, and I've got this set up, so I primarily use this for all my horizontal grinding. Keep those in the vertical position, and then this one is fantastic for doing all my blade profiling. So this is super duper easy to rotate. It's got one little lever that you move, and you can spin that round, put it into any position. And I've got my little fences, dead handy, you can clip those on. So if I want to get very accurate profile finishes, this is the grinder to use really. It also articulates here, so you've got different diameter wheels at this end, so if I need to put very tight finger grooves in a blade or real tight areas where the bevel meets the finger guard and things like that, I've got 3 different radius wheels on there. So in total you've got 3 on here, 1 on there, and then a bigger 8-inch wheel on this section, so you can pretty much do all your blade shaping all in one place. I've got it so that I can just flip it up and out the way. Now I've got this running through an inverter drive up here, and that means that I've got variable speed on this grinder like I've got on all the other grinders, but that means I can control this grinder, but it also means that I can flip this box that my mate Ant at 7K Metalworks made me, so it basically allows me to use one inverter drive to run up to 3 different motors. Not all simultaneously, you have to just isolate them, otherwise you'll trip this. But you can select that, and I've got it so that I can actually also run this buffer as well. So this is the buffer that I use most of the time for polishing blades, and I've got also a deburring wheel on this end, and I can use the same variable speed controller to control how that buffer runs. So that's why I moved the other one that was a fixed speed down to the other end. So that's really useful. So having that with a bit more space around it is really handy. I've got lots of these little trolleys that I move around the workshop, and they should slide a bit easier now that we've got more space. So I've got various blades in various stages that I can slide around the workshop. This sort of little, almost like a jeweler's polishing machine, is what I use for deburring the kydex and things. So I've got that set up. This is, unfortunately, it's the only machine that I've ended up buying that's 110 volt. So I've got that through a simple little inverter, and it's a little bit noisy, but it runs at very high RPM and it's variable speed, and that's perfect for polishing the kydex and deburring the kydex, with a little lamp that I leave on that tells me if I've left the inverter on. So when I turn the inverter off, that lamp turns off. So that's my sort of clue to remember to turn the inverter off. On this wall, I've got a disc sander mounted, which I use for flattening handle material. And this runs through one of those splitter boxes like I just showed you, which allows me to use one inverter drive to make this variable speed again. Having a variable speed disc sander in the workshop is absolutely brilliant, especially for flattening handle material. So that's my real luxury item really. I did used to have disc sanders, but they were fixed speed and they almost made it impossible to use really. I've got extraction for wood dust. So this tends to be the sort of handle material area for grinding. So I've got this big 6-inch diameter hose that I can move around, whether it be on this grinder or I flip it over, and that will take all the dust from that disc sander into my dust extractor, which is next door. So like I say, this is where I do most of the handle shaping. So this is another one of my Radius Master grinders, which like I say is through an inverter drive. You've probably seen this on various videos where we're shaping handles and things like that. Mostly use it in the vertical position for the handle shaping, but having said that, it will flip horizontally if I'm doing things like making strops or the carving tool sharpening kits. I'll use it in the horizontal position like this for using those nice curved wheels. And I tend to keep my belts separate. So these are all my abrasives that I use for handle shaping. So they're mostly zirconia and aluminium oxide, where I tend to use all ceramic belts on the actual metal side of things. So yeah, I've got one set up pretty much for wood grinding, and then I've finally got my last grinder set up, which I mostly use for grinding the blades. And I spent a little bit of time, again, adding those LED bulbs. But I made a little simple little sort of cover around the back of that, because that mostly is the sort of the dust generator. So I've got that set up with a bit of old metal shelving that hopefully will stop those sparks flying everywhere. And I've got to fill up my bucket. My bucket's got to go under there for the water quench really. I've got a separate little quench that I use with Windex in. So if you're quenching carbon steel blades, you'll find that that won't make rust appear on your blades like conventional water will. And I've got pretty much all my belts there ready for bevel grinding and things like that, and a few blades ready for putting the final edges on and things like that. A few Nomads, a Vilmark, a little Pixie and things like that. So a few bits and pieces. A few bits of tooling that I need for adjusting tool rests, so all my Allen keys. And then finally I've got one little high-speed bench grinder that I use for deburring bar stock, and it's got a wire brush on there which I find handy for deburring any edges on the steel and things like that. And having that on a sort of little mobile little pedestal is quite handy. I can pull it out when I need it, use it, and then I can actually just push it back into the workspace where I don't need it anymore. So that's pretty much it. You've pretty much done a loop of probably my favourite space. Just as a little bit of fun, just to show you that I'm not all serious knife maker. Few of you might have seen this on some of my Instagram posts of me holding up various knife blades in front of it. Because I spend so much time in here, Lois treated me one time and she wallpapered the inside of my door. It adds a little bit of fun, a little bit of colour in a fairly sort of worky orientated zone really. So that's a little bit of fun. I didn't have wallpaper as a kid because we lived in an old farmhouse. So as soon as I got a flat wall, I ended up treating myself to the wallpaper that I probably would have had when I was a kid. So that's the new and improved grinding room. Hope you've enjoyed the little quick tour of what we've got set up in here. And all I would say is that's probably the longest time that I've spent sorting out the workshop, but I think it's going to really help make the workshop more efficient. So if you haven't tidied your workshop, go out there and tidy it and you'll feel a lot better. So thanks for tuning in, hope you've enjoyed it, and we will see you next week.